Welcome to Colossal Works, the biggest things humanity has ever tried to build. In February of 2026, workers in Barcelona lifted the final piece into place on top of a church tower. It was a cross, 17 meters tall, about the height of a 5-story building. And with it, the tallest church tower on Earth was topped out after 144 years of construction. The architect who designed it had been dead for a century. This is the story of the church that refused to be finished. This is the Sagrada Familia. And it was never meant to be an ordinary church. It was meant to be a Bible written in stone, the greatest cathedral of the modern age. The man who took on that dream would spend the rest of his life on it and still not come close to seeing it done. Construction began in 1882 as a fairly conventional Gothic church. Then, in 1883, a young architect named Antoni Gaudí took over, and he tore up the plan. Gaudí did not want to copy the great cathedrals of Europe. He wanted to build something that looked like it had grown out of the earth. His design was unlike anything in architecture. Towers like melting stone, columns that branch like trees, facades crawling with sculpture. When finished, the church would have 18 towers, and the tallest, the Tower of Jesus Christ, would rise 172.5 meters into the sky. That number was not chosen at random. Gaudí set the height deliberately just below the nearby hill of Montjuïc, which stands about 177 meters. He believed that no work of human hands should ever rise higher than the work of God. So he designed his masterpiece to stop, on purpose, a few meters short. And there was one more radical choice: the money. The Sagrada Familia was built as what is called an expiatory temple. That means it would be funded entirely by donations, no government money, no royal treasury, just the coins and gifts of ordinary people, given slowly over generations. It was a spectacular way to build a cathedral. It was also a guarantee that it would take a very, very long time. Gaudí knew he would never live to see it finished. He is said to have shrugged that off because, in his words, his client was not in a hurry. But no one expected the end to come the way it did. On the 10th of June, 1926, Gaudí was walking to church when he was struck by a tram on the Gran Via. He was badly hurt, and because he dressed plainly and carried almost no identification, the most famous architect in Spain was mistaken for a poor beggar. He was taken to a public hospital for the destitute. By the time anyone realized who he was, it was too late to save him. Gaudí died 3 days later, and at that moment, his impossible church was barely a fraction built. What happened next is why this building became a legend. And it came on 3 fronts. The first was the most brutal. In 1936, the Spanish Civil War tore through Barcelona, and the Sagrada Familia became a target. Anarchist militias broke into the site. They burned the crypt, they set fire to Gaudí's workshop, and they smashed his studio to pieces. And in doing so, they destroyed something irreplaceable. Gaudí had left behind detailed plaster models and drawings, the key to his entire vision. Much of it was burned and shattered in a matter of days. The instructions for finishing the church had, quite literally, gone up in flames. Which led to the second front. The people who came after had to rebuild the design itself before they could rebuild the church. For decades, architects and modelers pieced Gaudí's intentions back together from charred fragments, from surviving photographs, and from broken bits of plaster. Later, they would use computers to reconstruct the impossible geometry hiding inside his half-melted models. They were not just building a cathedral. They were reverse engineering a dead genius. And the third front was the one Gaudí had chosen himself: money and time. Because it ran only on donations, the work crawled for much of the 20th century. There simply was not enough to build faster. It was so far outside the normal rules that the Sagrada Familia was under construction for 137 years without an official building permit. The city only issued one in 2019. What changed everything, in the end, was people showing up. As the towers rose and the church became world famous, tourism exploded. Today, around 5 million visitors a year come through its doors. In 2025, that turned into more than 130 million euros of income, all of it private. A huge share of it poured straight back into construction. The crowds that came to see the unfinished church were the ones who finally finished it. And so, we arrive at 2026. In October of 2025, the Sagrada Familia quietly passed a church in Germany that had held a record since 1890 and became the tallest church in the world. Then, in February 2026, that 17-meter cross was lifted to the top of the Tower of Jesus Christ, and the structure reached its full height of 172.5 meters. In June, on the exact 100th anniversary of Gaudi's death, that tower was blessed by the Pope. But here is the part that often gets misreported. This did not finish the basilica. What was completed was the outside of its tallest tower. Inside it, work goes on. And around it, the grand glory facade, several of the apostle towers, a chapel, and parts of the cloister are all still unbuilt. By the builder's own reckoning, the church is only around 70% complete. Those final pieces are not expected to be finished until at least the 2030s. There is always one more piece, which, in a strange way, might be the most fitting thing about it. Gaudí built a church that was never really designed to be rushed, funded by the slow generosity of strangers, guided by a plan that was burned and then lovingly rebuilt from the ashes. It has outlived wars, dictators, and its own creator. So, maybe the real question the Sagrada Familia leaves us with is not when it will finally be finished. Maybe it is whether a building like this was ever meant to be. If this blew your mind, hit that like button and subscribe for more megastructures. And tell me in the comments which one I should cover next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.